This started small. The kind of changes you ignore because you don't want to be that guy. The paranoid, insecure husband who sees ghosts where there aren't any. Stephanie and I had been together for 7 years, married for 5. She was my best friend. Or at least I thought she was. Looking back, I can pinpoint the first sign. She started dressing differently. Not that I minded, people evolve, tastes change. But it wasn't just a new style. It was effort. The kind of effort you don't put in for the man who's already seen you at your worst. The one who held your hair back when you had food poisoning or watched you drool on the pillow at night. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless. A confidence boost. Something for herself. But then came the late nights. "I have to stay at the office a little longer," she'd text. Or, "The girls want to grab a drink. Don't wait up." I never questioned her. Never gave her a reason to think I didn't trust her. Because I did. I really did. Then, one night, she came home smelling like a man's cologne. She hugged me briefly, stiffly, then disappeared into the shower. I sat there on the couch, staring at the darkened TV screen, my gut twisting in ways I couldn't explain. Something was off. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading into things too much, that Stephanie wouldn't do that to me, to us. I was wrong. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was just imagining things. But once the seed of doubt was planted, I started noticing more. Stephanie's phone, which used to be left on the nightstand or kitchen counter, was now always within arm's reach. She kept it face down. The ringer was perpetually on silent. When a notification popped up, she'd glance at it, then tilt the screen away, her expression unreadable. One night, while she was in the shower, I reached for it. My heart was pounding. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but I had to know. Locked. She had never locked her phone before. I put it back where it was, guilt settling in my stomach. I hated feeling like some jealous, controlling husband. But something was wrong. I knew it. Then there were the phone calls. She'd step out onto the balcony when she talked, or into the bedroom with the door half closed, voice hushed. The conversations were always short, and when she came back, she'd act normal, casual, like nothing had happened. But I could see it in her eyes. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. A silent, invisible wall. And no matter how hard I tried to break through it, she kept rebuilding it, brick by brick. One night, I finally confronted her. "Steph," I said as she climbed into bed beside me. "Is something going on?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You've just been acting different. Distant." She sighed and turned on her side, facing away from me. "I'm just stressed. Work has been a lot." That was the beginning of the excuses. Work, friends, stress. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the truth was coming for me, whether I was ready for it or not. I wasn't looking for proof. Not really. But proof found me anyway. It was a Saturday morning when I finally saw it. Undeniable, irrefutable evidence that my gut hadn't been lying to me. Stephanie was in the shower, her phone charging on the nightstand. Normally, she took it with her everywhere. But that morning, she must have been in a rush. A message popped up on the screen. I wasn't even trying to snoop. I just glanced at it out of habit. But the words sent a cold chill down my spine. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again?" I stared at the screen, my hands suddenly clammy. The sender's name? Just an initial. T. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. My ears were ringing. My mind was racing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could have unlocked her phone. I knew her passcode. But I didn't. I didn't need to. I already knew. Stephanie had been lying to my face. I backed away from the nightstand just as I heard the shower turn off. My body moved on autopilot. I grabbed my coffee cup, sat down on the couch, and forced myself to act normal. A minute later, she walked into the room, towel wrapped around her, hair dripping. She smiled at me like nothing had changed, like she wasn't sneaking around behind my back. And for the first time, I smiled back while feeling nothing at all, because at that moment, my mind wasn't on the pain. It wasn't on the betrayal. It was on revenge. I didn't explode. I didn't yell. I didn't even ask her about the text. I played the long game. For the rest of the day, I acted completely normal. I smiled when she talked. I nodded at the right moments. I even kissed her goodbye when she left to run errands. But inside, I was already setting things in motion. That night, after she fell asleep, I started digging. If there was one text, there were more. And if there were more, there was a trail. I had access to our shared phone account. I pulled up the call logs and messages. I didn't need to read the actual texts. Just seeing the frequency was enough. Late-night calls. Hour-long conversations. Hundreds of texts exchanged with one number, T. I copied everything. Screenshots, timestamps, call durations. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I needed proof. The next step, finding out exactly who T was, took me less than 2 days. A reverse lookup gave me a name I recognized. Tyler, my so-called best friend. I nearly laughed at how cliché it was. My wife and my best friend. The kind of betrayal you see in movies, the kind you think will never happen to you. I was done playing dumb. The next evening, I waited until she got home. She walked in, kicking off her heels, looking exhausted. I was sitting at the dining table, laptop open, phone records pulled up. "Hey!" she sighed, tossing her purse onto the couch. "Long day." I leaned back in my chair. "Yeah? Must be hard sneaking around behind my back." Her head snapped up. For the first time in our marriage, she looked genuinely speechless. What? I turned the laptop toward her, showing the call logs. "You want to explain why you've spent over 20 hours talking to Tyler this month?" Her face drained of color, but she recovered fast. "This isn't what you think." I laughed, shaking my head. "Oh, it's exactly what I think." She opened her mouth, probably to feed me some excuse, but then she stopped. Something changed in her eyes. The guilt disappeared, and she smirked. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was just caught. And then she dropped the bombshell. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folder, and slammed it onto the table. I opened it without thinking. And there it was. Divorce papers. "I was going to tell you eventually," she said, arms crossed. "I've been with an incredible man for 8 months now. He's better than you in every way." Her voice was so cold, so indifferent, like our marriage had meant nothing. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And if you even think about touching him, I'll have you locked up." My blood boiled. My fists clenched under the table. But I didn't react. I just smiled, because she had no idea. My revenge was already in motion. I stared at the divorce papers for a long moment, running my fingers over the crisp edges. She must have felt so powerful, so untouchable, slamming them down in front of me like some kind of victorious declaration. She thought she had won, but she had no idea that I had already set everything in motion. I took a deep breath, keeping my expression calm. "You've been planning this for a while, haven't you?" Stephanie smirked. "Like I said, 8 months. 8 months. 8 months of betrayal. 8 months of sneaking around." I exhaled through my nose and leaned back, nodding slowly. "All right, that was it."
No yelling. No begging.
Just one word. She blinked, thrown off. I could see it in her face. She expected rage, accusations, maybe even tears, but my reaction was cold, calculated. And that made her nervous. "What do you mean, all right?" she asked, crossing her arms. I picked up the papers and flipped through them, pretending to read. "I mean, I'll sign them." Her body relaxed a fraction, but she was still watching me, waiting for the outburst that wasn't coming. "You're taking this well." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Oh, trust me, Steph. I'm processing a lot right now. But one thing I know for sure." I slid the papers back toward her. "You're not getting everything you think you are." She frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" I stood up, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. Before stepping out, I glanced back at her. "It means you should probably check your accounts." And then I left. Here's the thing. Stephanie had always been careless with money. She was used to me handling the bills, the mortgage, the credit cards. She spent freely, assuming there would always be more. Big mistake. Because the moment I suspected something was off, I started making changes. I had quietly moved most of our savings into an account with only my name on it. I had rerouted my paycheck to a separate account weeks ago. The house? In my name. She had never bothered to put her name on the deed. The car she drove? Leased under my credit. And the cherry on top. She had been using our joint credit card for her little rendezvous with Tyler. Hotels, dinners, weekend getaways. And I had every single transaction documented. So when she checked her accounts that night, she was in for a rude awakening. I turned off my phone after the 5th missed call. She could panic all she wanted. It was too late. The next phase of my plan was more personal. See, Tyler had a wife, and she deserved to know exactly what kind of man she was married to. I reached out to her with the receipts, phone logs, messages, even photos I had managed to get from Stephanie's cloud backup before she changed her passwords. I expected tears, maybe denial. What I didn't expect was anger. Turns out, Tyler had also been lying to her about where their money was going. He had been taking money from their savings to fund his affair with Stephanie. By the next morning, she had blasted everything online. Screenshots, details, dates. She didn't hold back. And that's when everything started to crumble. Tyler's job? Gone. His company had a strict moral clause, and when the affair went public, they wasted no time cutting him loose. Stephanie? Well, her incredible man was now unemployed and getting served with divorce papers himself. And as for me, I walked away with everything. The house, my savings, my dignity. Stephanie got nothing. She had thrown those divorce papers at me like she was doing me a favor, like she was the one in control. But in the end, she lost everything. Stephanie showed up at the house 2 days later. I knew she would. I was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise when her car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out looking disheveled, like she hadn't slept. For a moment, I just stared at her. The same woman I had once planned to spend my life with. The woman I had trusted, defended, loved. But I didn't feel anything for her anymore.
No sadness. No nostalgia.
Just indifference. She marched up the steps, eyes blazing. You had no right to do what you did. I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my coffee. No right? You threw divorce papers in my face and told me your boyfriend was better than me in every way. I leaned back. What exactly did you think was going to happen? She crossed her arms, glaring. You ruined my life. I laughed. Actually laughed.
No, Stephanie.
You did that. I just made sure you didn't walk away with my life in the process. She clenched her jaw, her whole body trembling with frustration. I have nothing now. My accounts are empty. My credit is wrecked. Tyler. She cut herself off, shaking her head. You planned this. You set me up. I tilted my head, pretending to think. Or maybe you just underestimated me. Maybe you thought I'd roll over and let you humiliate me. But turns out, I don't owe you a soft landing. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. I was wrong about Tyler. Her voice cracked slightly. She hesitated. I made a mistake. And there it was, the first sign of regret. Maybe she thought I'd take pity on her, that I'd let her come crawling back. But the truth was I had already moved on. I stood up and stepped closer until we were just a few feet apart. You did make a mistake, Steph, I said quietly. Not just with Tyler, with everything. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Can't we just?
No.
She flinched. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my jaw. I don't hate you, Steph. Not anymore. But I don't respect you either. And without that, there's nothing left. Her shoulders slumped. So that's it. That's it. She stood there for a few moments, as if waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. Eventually, she nodded stiffly, turned around, and walked back to her car. I watched as she drove away, and for the first time in months I felt free. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. I kept the house, my savings, and my peace of mind. Stephanie? Last I heard, she was struggling to rebuild her life, hopping from one temporary place to another. Tyler's wife had taken him for everything in their divorce, and he ended up moving to another city, probably hoping to outrun his own reputation. As for me, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. If anything, I was grateful, because Stephanie's betrayal had been a lesson, a painful, brutal one, but a lesson nonetheless. I learned to trust my instincts. I learned that love, real love, isn't just words, it's actions. And most importantly, I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's thriving without them.